Hi everyone, today we are looking at the American West and we are looking at Law and Order, the first of the four themes that the course is taught in. So, Law and Order then, let's jump right in. Firstly, to recap, Law and Order is looking at lawlessness in early towns and settlements, 1830 to 51. It looks at law and order in the settlements, the role of officers, law officers, and government, and it looks at law and order, the range wars, and efforts to deal with lawlessness. So it's those three areas that we are concentrating on. As a result of the mass settlement in the West, especially after 1849, the gold rush, a major problem arose in these new settlements, and that was lawlessness. Lawless is when it's hard to keep law and order, not that there aren't any laws. There's a rise in crime and a rise in violence, and there's a lack of officers and sheriffs and marshals to stop it from happening. Big picture, early settlements. The new mining settlements in California were the center of early lawlessness in the West. These isolated mining towns provided the opportunity for lawlessness to thrive, whilst law and order struggled to effectively manage the situation. Lawlessness. Many of the 49ers went into poverty, which directly caused an increase of crime. So they went to California, tried to find gold, didn't, ended up poor, and turned into crime. The mining towns were mostly populated by men who gambled, drunk, and fought. Rising crimes included racism towards the Chinese miners, stagecoach robbery, and claim jumping, stealing somebody's gold plot. Also, there were gangs in San Francisco, people that had gone out there to mine gold, failed, gone to San Francisco, and got into a gang. Law and order. People often followed the code of the West and shot others in self defense. Law enforcement struggled. There was a lack of officers, one U.S. Marshal for the whole of California. Sheriffs were poorly trained and paid, which meant that they took bribes and failed a lot. This led to the growth of vigilantes or mining courts to solve their own problems. Vigilantes are people that take the law into their own hands, hunt down the criminals, and usually hang them. Sometimes, well, it's violent, isn't it? It's just the fact that they're using violence to solve problems. So it shows you why the West is lawless. Big picture, there were developments to help improve law and order across the Wild West from the 1850s. Firstly, railroads and telegraphs. From 1869, it allowed sheriffs and U.S. Marshals to hear about and deal with problems quicker. So you could get a message to them on a railroad or the telegraph, which was basically like the Morse code system that could send messages. Town marshals were hired to end crime in towns like Abilene or Tombstone. However, they often caused more issues. They lacked training, they had criminal backgrounds like Wyatt Earp. They basically used violence to combat violence, so it was still a problem. There was a rise of vigilante companies like the Pinkertons, who had thousands of private detectives. They would hunt down and capture people, often using violence. There were, however, new challenges facing the government. Hell on wheels. New lawless towns on the railroad like Abilene, which had significant problems with cowboys until weapons were banned. So Abilene was where the cowboys took the cows to load them onto trucks to go to the cities. Once they're there, they let their hair down, spend their money, get drunk, fight, that sort of thing. It causes problems. Gangs like the Reno Gang or the Regulators, Billy the Kid, robbed banks, committed stagecoach robbery. First train robbery was in 1866. Code of the West led to 20,000 people being killed in self-defense, not self-defense, as I put there. The Range Wars. Conflict rose between ranchers and homesteaders on the Great Plains. These were called the Range Wars. Causes. Ranchers accused settlers of cattle rustling and barbed wire hurting their cattle, while settlers accused the ranchers of misusing the Homestead Act to take the best land. The cattle was eating crops, ranchers were misusing their power and influence, like getting the judges to agree with them, buying themselves out of problems, that sort of thing. Billy the Kid was involved in the Lincoln County Range War. The 1892 Johnson County War is an example of a range war. By the late 1880s, cattle ranchers were struggling after the Great Die-Up. Groups like the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, fearing cattle rustling and rising tensions with the settlers. In 1889, Bothwell, a WSGA rancher, murders Watson and Averill, two homesteaders who he thought were cattle rustlers. No one was prosecuted for the murders. He got away with it because of his power. In 1892, the WSGA paid 22 gunmen to kill 70 suspected rustlers in Johnson County. They end up in a gunfight with locals, and the army has to restore peace. They have to rescue these gunmen. The WSGA used their wealth and used their power to delay the trial, intimidate witnesses, and help the gunmen. The WSGA and the gunmen get away with the incident because Johnson County runs out of money. They keep stalling and delaying the WSGA until they get away with it. Wyatt Earp. The gunfight at the OK Corral provides a good example of the lawlessness and conflict between settlers in the West. In 1881, Wyatt Earp hired as marshal in Tombstone to deal with the rancher-cowboy problems, range wars. So the cowboys and the ranchers are kicking off against each other. Wyatt Earp is brought in to sort it out. Earp had been a criminal, cattle rustling and running a brothel, but was seen as a strong gunfighter, and that was what got him the job rather than his suitability. So again, they're relying on violence to sort out lawlessness. These are the key events in the conflict in Tombstone, so the gunfight at the OK Corral. Conflict between ranchers, the McClary and Clanton families led to crime in Tombstone. In 1879, town hired Earp as a marshal and his brothers as his deputies. The town introduces a ban on weapons, whilst Earp and his brothers are accused of engaging in stagecoach robberies themselves. Tension rises. On the 26th of October 1881, Earp and his brothers confront the McClarys, leading to a shootout. 3 are dead. The Earps leave Tombstone. Basically, their contract is not renewed because the townspeople are sick of violence being used to solve violence. The story of the OK Corral highlights these issues: problems of the range wars in the West, the situation in Tombstone, the poor quality of law officers, why Earp was a criminal who made it worse. Big picture, Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid was a notorious gunslinger of the West. Billy grew up in mining camps in New Mexico, living a life of poverty. He turned to crime, first being arrested at 14 for cattle rustling and eventually killed 21 men. His life reveals the problems of lawlessness in the West, so this is why his life is important or significant. So if you're asked about the significance of Billy the Kid, this is it. He escaped from jail multiple times. He was hard to catch. He was a gunslinger, hired for conflict, showing that people prefer to use vigilantes, the code of the West, to solve issues. That's why he's important. He shows that people would rather rely on violence and try something else. He was caught and killed by Pat Garrett instead of going to jail. His life highlights the range wars and the conflict on the plains. Billy was part of the Regulators gang who were hired to fight in the 1878 Lincoln County War, a range war. He'd killed 21 people, showing how bloody the West was, and he was made popular in newspapers for his actions, so they turned him into a hero. So the significance of Billy the Kid is the fact that he shows how violent the West is and how poor and limited law enforcement is. Okay, that is a brief look at lawlessness in the Wild West. There are links below this video that you can use to help you revise more. Okay, thanks. See you soon.